know if we should stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United
States
of America
and to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands, one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
liberty
justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, so Casey is here from Studer. Thank you, Casey. And we're going to be going over basically the KPIs and milestone goals that we have set up that we discussed in our mission vision meetings. You want to take it from here, Casey?
Yeah, actually, Tony's going to kick it off, and then I will accompany him and Tamara in the presentation tonight. But really pleased to be with you and excited to be continuing our partnership.
All right, I had to unmute myself. Am I correct that everybody can see the primary slide? Yes? And I'm going to go to slideshow and just give me a thumbs up or call out. Actually, I'm going to lose the visual here, I think. If you just call out, let me know you can still see the full screen.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. All right, thanks. Vice Chair McNeil and directors. We are here tonight. Again, as I said, in the intermission beforehand, grateful that the board is willing to come together and add an extra meeting here this month. It gave us a chance to both be timely in reporting back to the board our work together with Studer to date. We're just 6 weeks into the school year, but we began with a deep dive with Casey's assistance and coaching about 8 weeks ago with the full administrative team as we got ready to launch this school year. And I'm going to provide a little context on the work I think that's really the purpose here, not just provide you with that context on the work that's been happening over the last 8 weeks. I'm really, really pleased with the partnership that we have with Studer. And I was really, I don't know, selfish is the right word. After we finished the first phase of our work with Studer, I told Casey Blahoviak, our partner, I said, I really want to see Casey stay and be the person that's working with Malala into our next full year. And I'm grateful that she was assigned to be our liaison during this time and our coach. I'm also pleased that we're able to bring this report, but also give some timely opportunity for us to get some feedback from the board about timelines that we're projecting moving forward. And is this the cadence? Is this the structure of the work that we all were expecting when we first invited Studer to talk with us about really intentional school improvement planning that begins with a clear understanding of what success looks like? And I think maybe I'm going to just start there and talk about one of the activities that Casey did with the administrative team this summer, really framed both the philosophical but the practical part of what it means to improve outcomes as a school district. And it was a really straightforward metaphor, but it was a powerful metaphor. And each member of the administrative team was given a set of pieces to an item that needed to be built. And everyone was sent out into a space with backs to each other and one person directing traffic. And I'll probably not do the full experience justice here verbally, but what became clear as we started the task of putting together, making the attempt of moving the parts through, like we would our students, through the matriculation from grade to grade to grade, the end product didn't come out at first like we would hope. And the learning that we had in that process was, how do we refine, how do we communicate, how do we fail quickly so that we can refine and improve the processes and procedures so that we're not waiting a full year to decide. Suffice it to say that the end product came out perfectly, right? And it came out quickly and it came out efficiently. And so that's our goal, is that kids are perfect just for being kids, But each one's going to be different, and our hope is that we graduate each one with, and you'll see the language. It's in your board adopted vision and mission, which came from this work here as well, that sort of defines what success looks like. And it's here that each student begins, or each student has opportunity and access to explore and pursue their own aspirations. I just want to amplify that one more time, because that's coming out in our design of curriculum and instruction. It's coming out. It came out all throughout our process last year, that each student is an individual and is entitled to pursue their own aspirations. We're not going to be telling students that we're preparing every student, and that every student must be headed off to college, for example, to be successful. We're going to prepare students with the skills to be successful in whatever pathway they choose, but we're not a school system that's going to continue to unintentionally send the message to students who are not college bound that they're somehow less than. I think public education, well, not just public education, education in general did that for a lot of years. And our job is to light their hearts and minds on fire with something that leads to that promising future. We got to get the skills in place to make that possible, and that's part of the mission, the knowledge, skills, and habits mind. I'm not going to read all of these to us, but I'm going to pause on this next piece where we talk about the 5 pillars. And this is where we are at this moment in time, where the administrative team with Casey's support has, and I want to give a shout out to Tamara Jackson here too, because Tamara, as a member of the teaching and learning leadership in the district, is, in my experience, over my career, she is an exceptional teacher of adult learners and leader of adult learning. And so I've asked her to facilitate some discussions with the administrative team on a number of different fronts, but one of them, and a really important one right now, is how will we measure our success on each of these 5 pillars? What are the key performance indicators that'll tell us we're finishing the race in the way that we had intended to, as if it's a race, right? Education is not a race; it's a journey. But at the end of the day, did we reach the milestone that we set out to be the summative measure? But as all of you know from business or whatever your world professionally looks like, there are leading indicator goals too, right? So there's the summative goal, and then there's the early indicators that say you're headed the right direction. And I think that we've talked oftentimes about leading indicators and summative indicators, but we've not done, I think, the work that I think Casey and Studer Education is going to help us do more effectively, and that is to, and I use this term endearingly, right, to fail quickly. There's no shame in failure. In fact, put your finger on what didn't work and knowing it quickly and reassessing and adjusting quickly is something that education has not always done very well. We've waited in 1-year cycles to do our reassessment. And really what we're talking about here is a cycle of assessment and improvement that's going to move in 45-day increments. And you'll see that here spoken to again in a little bit. Tonight, we're just going to update you, and I've already done some of that on the partnership. Really pleased with our decision to work with Studer. We're going to talk a little bit about the scorecard metrics themselves. We have not finalized any yet. We will by the time we get to your January board meeting, and we're going to talk about the timeline between now and January. But we want you to have a sense of what that conversation sounded like with our administrative team. And then finally, we're going to ask for your feedback on the cadence of the board updates on the scorecard that we've projected for the duration of this year, and then looking ahead to the 24-25 school year as well. And I'm going to turn it to Casey to take the next slide here.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. So Tony highlighted some of the great things that we were able to do together. I spent a wonderful day in August with the administrative team, really focusing on the development of leadership and what does that look like to continue that development in an organization like Molalla River School District that's one of excellence and committed to that continued growth in that direction. And so the work that I've been doing with the leadership team, really in partnership with Tony, has been walking this parallel path of both what does it look like to lead with intentional cultural improvement in a school district? What does it look like to create a positive environment for students, staff, and families? And then that parallel path also of strategy. So as Tony mentioned, really thinking about how do we identify what success looks like, identify those leading measures, and identify those end of year, quite often larger lagging measures of more public success. So it's been a joy and an honor to be supporting the team. And Tony, if you'd advance to the next slide, that work that we do is based on, in Studer Education, what we call our 9 principles. And I share this with you just for you to get a sense of some of the skill development underneath each of the tactics that you'll start to hear a little bit more about today. We believe that these pieces are what make great individual leaders in any field, but they're also what makes an excellent leadership team. And so really the work that we've been doing is thinking about not only how do each one of the members of the team develop as leaders, but how does the full team develop as leaders to be able to execute well on those priorities that the community set forth as part of the strategic planning process. And so the work that we've done side by side, if you'd advance to the next slide for me, Tony, thank you so much. We wanted to just give you a sense in those 2 areas of culture and strategy, what our work has looked like since I was last with you in Molalla River. And so in the area of culture, one of the really critical steps that we've taken together is on something that's called survey results to action steps. And so in your district, you've used a student experience survey for a number of years, and there's been peaks and valleys on that, just like any organization would experience with the survey. And so when working with Tony and his team, we have a really fantastic opportunity to do some deep listening with students. We're starting there in responding to the survey to really get some concrete action steps in place, informed by student input and their experiences through your schools and your system. And so from Studer Education, I've provided that development for the team, provided them templates to support that next work, and then recommended a cadence of what that could look like, as well as a communication approach for them to use to support that work. And then the district has been, of course, a great partner in this, in establishing and supporting that timeline, working through a consistent communication approach to have alignment there, and then working to support individual and group accountability. When I talk about accountability with partners, I look at accountability as you can count on me to do what I said I would do, and that we can count on one another that we've all done what we committed to doing. And so the district is well on their way to taking those steps to really roll those results out in a way that is really targeted to drive for an improved experience from those that complete the survey. And as I mentioned, they're starting with students, which of course is at the heart of your work. Then in terms of our strategy development, I've also had the great honor to provide the team development on the scorecard development process, provided the team a number of different templates of different samples, as well as a document that they can work within as a launching point for their own scorecard development. And then a continued thought partner for them around the measures that matter most, or those metrics or key performance indicators that are really critical to understanding not only annual, but leading progress towards those priorities. The district's work, they've been establishing that and working through the timeline to identify those metrics. And in this process, there's a lot of deep work that happens. And you can see on number 2 there, we start asking some pretty important questions around the data sources that are going to be most predictive for us. Of course, they have the wonderful opportunity to communicate this to you as a board, and then as a district to really support those aligned efforts with the strategic plan goals. Because ultimately where we want this work to get, as you'll see on the next slide, oh, thank you, Tony. And then there, of course, my support for the district leaders as Tony sees fit in terms of cabinet support monthly or touch points for him or other leaders. And really where this work is taking us is what we would call a line of sight. So thinking about, yeah, you can hit the next one for me. Perfect. It has a lot of animation. You can go all the way through. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thinking about your district strategic plan, setting those priorities, and then there's a cascade down to the district scorecard that you'll hear about the development around, to what that means for an individual business, or excuse me, building or department leader in their development of their own scorecards. And then that continued cascade to individual teachers to see how their critical work impacts those overall goals of the district, and ultimately each student seeing and experiencing that success. You'll notice that's a double-headed arrow. So while we do talk about a cascade, it really does move in both directions. And as we learn from students and their experiences, it's informing back up throughout the organization to continue providing that really great work for those that you serve. And right now, if you'll advance one more, Tony, one more, perfect. The work that the district is focused on is that district scorecard and school scorecard. And so Tamara and Tony are going to take you a little deeper into what that's looking like in Molalla River as we speak.
Thanks, Casey. I'm gonna jump in here first, but Tamara and I are gonna, I think, play off of each other. Before I get into that district scorecard and school and department scorecard, so I want to just share an anecdote about something. You know, hopefully we're never too old to learn. And it might seem simple, but boy, I learned something new from Casey here this last fall, and I think I can speak for the team on this. That if we're, for example, Casey talked about focusing on students first, our primary, customer. If we have certain understanding of our students' experience through student surveys, and we hear students say X, Y, or Z about their sense of safety or fairness or culture, what we've asked our principals to do is lean into some data at their school level and seek to gather more specific information from students who are the ones themselves who provided the survey data last year. So an example might be that on a certain measure, students on average had a mean score for the school on, I'm making this up as an example, right? Safety and security in the lunchroom. And if the mean score for the students, I see a thumbs up there from Madison. If the mean score for students on a scale of 1 to 5 was, say a 2.3 on that subject, the administrators at that school are going to be sitting with student leaders, student representatives, and running focus groups to ask the students two essential questions. And Casey, you'll correct me or amend here if I miss the mark here, but one, they'll inform students of what the data said last year. And I guess there's just really one essential question. If at the end of like a 12-week cycle, we came back and we asked students how you'd rate us now. If our goal is to be at 5, what would need to happen? What are some examples of things we can do as a school or as adults to move the metric from the 2.2 that it was at closer to the 5 or even at the 5? And as simple as it sounds, asking your customer very specifically for their advice and input in safe spaces where kids can be honest and truthful about their experiences can give principals and teacher leaders really tangible things to build improvement plans on and implement those improvement plans and seek more feedback and more data. And then in the next cycle around, we would expect if we're doing it right, we'd start to move in the right direction. But if we didn't, we'd fail quickly. We wouldn't wait till the end of the school year. We'd get the students' feedback pretty quickly on that measure and go back at it a second time or a third time to continue to improve. And I highlight that to say I think I know what school improvement is, but I've never approached school improvement from a 12-week cycle that way. And I think that is that's a different way of thinking about not only culture, but academic outcomes from a school-wide perspective. Casey, I don't know if you'd add to that at all, but that was one thing I wanted to highlight for the board that I envision being much different as we move forward.
Yeah, Tony, and thanks for that detail and really well explained. I think we in education, we want to solve the problem, right? And so when adults are faced with survey data or academic data, achievement data, we want to come up with a solution quickly and we want to start moving. This process encourages us, as Tony said, to slow down. And instead of the adults saying, well, this will improve the student experience, it directly involves them in providing information. And then what the principals will do is they'll gather that feedback and say, all right, this is one or two things that we can commit to doing. We're going to tell students this is based on your feedback that we're doing this. And then we're going to, as Tony said, we're going to ask that survey question again in 12 weeks to be able to say, how are we doing? You said this would make a difference. We did it. Let us know, so that we're not waiting till that annual administration of the survey to see if the improvement actions made a difference. So it's a simple but really impactful way to move culture and experience.
So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to jump back to an earlier slide, and then Tamara and I are going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's happened with the administrative team. This earlier slide with all 5 of the pillars or goal statements, you could imagine that each department, for example, our HR department, might take a large responsibility for the last one. MRSD is committed to developing and supporting all staff members, as well as retaining and recruiting diverse professionals who are focused on positive student outcomes. When you read it a little more carefully, it's not just HR that's that's focused on recruiting and retaining, but it's also about supporting. Where does that support come from? Does that come from the Office of Teaching and Learning? Does it come from the Office of the Superintendent? What are some other individuals that have some accountability tied to that measure long term? And where can we identify leading metrics and summative metrics to measure our progress? Some of that might be in survey data. Some of that might be at end of year retention data by gender, retention data by grade level, retention data by content area. We can slice the data up in a lot of different ways to understand what is or isn't working for staff. We want to be an exceptional place for professional educators to work and want to call their home. You could run up through all 5 of these and begin to identify different metrics that could be measured in the short and the long term. And I'm guessing that each of us, if we each headed off on our own and began to brainstorm what those metrics might be, we'd come up with a deep list of early indicators and sum of indicators. Many of them would overlap with each other. Some of them wouldn't. Our own personal priorities about what does it mean to be, in an environment where I'm retained as a professional, that my values might look one way or another. And so getting clear about what it is we want success to look like and knowing upfront and agreeing to that upfront will be important, because if we just start measuring stuff, well, then we're just measuring stuff. We might not be measuring the right things. I want to talk about where we are now and ask Tamara to jump in here as well. This image shows you basically where we are at this moment in time. To the far left on this slide, we're talking with you about what's coming up from here forward. And so I just want to focus in the lower left-hand corner. Over the next 6 weeks or so, Tamara and I will be working with, facilitating our administrative team with support from Casey to create a draft of those cascading metrics for the full admin team to provide some feedback on. It's important that everybody has some voice in this, and yet, there are certain measures, certain indicators that we know are going to lead to on-time graduation. One example might be attainment of Algebra 1 credit. Algebra 1 credit might be a leading indicator that we're measuring and we're reporting on a really regular basis. If we're looking at freshmen on track to graduate, and we've done that informally as a system. Our teachers have paid attention to that, maybe a principal or two. But as a district, I will admit up front, as your superintendent, I've not gone in and I've not asked high school administrators to provide reports on a regular basis about the percentage of freshmen who are successfully on track to earn a full year's credit in Algebra 1 before they finish their freshman year. Better yet, what if we move that measure down to 8th grade? What if we moved it down to 8th grade and look to have more and more 8th graders attaining a full year of Algebra 1 credit? There are discussions, obviously, that need to be had to land in a place where we say, as an admin team, here's our recommendation, board of directors. We might say it's 8th grade. We might say it's freshman year. We might look more so at one indicator than another, knowing that we can't, and Casey's reminded me of this, we want to really identify clearly what are those things that are too important to fail. We could measure a gazillion things, but what are those indicators of success that are too important to fail? And are we going to report them back on ourselves and to the board on a regular basis? By the time we walk into the winter break, my expectation is that we will have finalized a look at what administratively we believe are the metrics. And we'll be bringing that back to the board in January. Now, when I say finalized, it's always up for your feedback as well. And we'll be bringing you reports between now and then, because if there are certain things that board members are wanting us to consider, including in these metrics that are important and that might not have risen to the top, there's space for all of us to inform where that lands. I don't know if Tamara, you want to jump in and talk about those, really, and these cycles are 45-day cycles here, and not the 90-day cycles that I was talking about earlier. But Tamara's done some work with the admin team to look at culture, to look at academics, and you want to speak to some of that?
Sure. We've met on several occasions with the admin team, and they have been extremely thoughtful and really digging and analyzing what those metrics are and how often and what kind of metrics they should be. As Tony mentioned, really making sure voices are heard, and as well as voices of our students in the example that he gave. So after it's presented to the board in January, just like anything that you want to look to grow to is those frequent check-ins, hey, how much growth do I see? Is there something that I need to do differently? How do we keep moving forward and growing is really the focus of those check-ins. And if we go back to that list of pillars and goals, there are a lot of them, right? And each of these pillars have, of course, those goal statements. And the teams have been very methodical about looking at those goal statements and breaking them down, making sure that, okay, how do we measure this? And these, of course, are the goals that and the pillars that were worked on by the strategic planning Community Advisory Committee, which I think Vice Chair McNeil and also Chair Tallarico were on. Is that right? And for 7 sessions, this is what was created. So again, moving back to how do we measure? And it's important to kind of to set up that plan and those frequent check-ins. And again, what are those metrics that we're going to be using?
One of the things that I would add here, I've shared with the board, I've shared with the admin team, for the last 8 or 9 years as your superintendent, we've done a lot of work in K-5 reading. K-5 reading achievement is an early indicator of kids' readiness to be ready to learn in middle school and high school. You may have seen on the state report card results that were released recently, a continuation of, we're not at the bottom, our students aren't performing at the bottom, but I will tell you that's not a measure of success to not be performing at the bottom. Our students reading at grade level in the elementary grades is not where it needs to be. And I've talked with our elementary team about how this work of quick cycles of data reporting is going to be critical for our success. So instead of waiting until the end of a school year to look at the state assessment scores, for example, or the Lexile scores that a student might be reading at, I'm going to be asking principals to be sharing on 45-day increments, not with their teachers, not only with themselves, but with me. What are the oral fluency levels of our most struggling readers who are receiving intervention? What are the DIBELS scores? It's measuring oral fluency, phonemic awareness and oral fluency. What are those looking like on 45-minute or on 45-day increments? If we're not seeing those change significantly, then something needs to change in order for us to have confidence that those children are closing the gap on moving to reading at grade level by the time they finish 5th grade. Now, the students we get, whether they have letter recognition as kindergartners or not, they're all capable of reading at grade level by the time they exit 5th grade, and that's going to be among our #1 missions. And I think this 45-day accountability piece is important, not for undue pressure, but hey, if it's not working, let's change, and let's change quickly so that every kid gets the best year in 3rd grade that they can get. I sound like I'm trying to sell something here. I guess I'm really excited about the work, and I really appreciate Casey's leadership supporting us. I don't know if, Tamara, there's more that you would add, but I would like to open it up for questions, both on what you're hearing us say, any feedback on timelines. The screen in front of us is what next year would look like. We'd come to you in the fall, in August, with the baseline data already lined up and everything clearly in place. It's not that we don't have academic goals this year, but we're just trying to be very intentional about, as Casey says, identifying those measures that are too important to fail and having those reporting cycles built.
Tony, can I add one thing before you open it up for questions? And thank you for just really speaking to the technical part, but the heart part of it, I always appreciate that about you. So one thing that I'd ask you as a board to consider in this process, and that I ask executive leaders within organizations to think about, is the data in these cycles are data for improvement, right? And so really thinking about, from a leadership perspective, what do I need to know from my level of governance to have faith that these strong educators that are in our system are responding in the way that their skills and expertise prepare them to, right? So there will be times where we don't hit the growth mark that we have identified for ourselves. And so a question that might be helpful for you in that case would be, tell me what you're trying next, right? Because it's about, as Tony said a couple times, we want to identify quickly that what we're doing is not yielding the results. And the one thing that can be challenging as a system moves into this real transparency of data, there can be elements of fear that creep in around that, right? Because it's a little bit more public. And so as leaders, if we can stay focused on the urgency to accomplish this, really big work for your students in your community, but also helping to encourage, what are we trying next, right? What'd you learn? What are you trying in this next round that's different? Because that's where you're going to see the change. So I just offer that just in terms of something that may or may not be helpful to you.
I find this really exciting, and what you'll see in it's really common in business now is this agile approach to when you're doing something continuous improvement. You may not know exactly how to get to the end point, but you know how you can take iterative steps and learn along the way. This is one of the more exciting things that I recall since being on the board. My question is around organization change management. So this is going to change the world of our staff. So how is that going? I assume that I see as part of this process is to get buy-in, make sure they're voice of the stakeholder. But how is that going with the staff, and just in terms of this change that is happening?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I will say that, well, interestingly, the activity that Casey did, I mean, I just remember the day. I wish I had pictures. I could show a video. You know, we were all in the hallway out here and attempting to build these barbells and just the ahas that were going on for people that could link right back to, oh, how does this happen? How does this is just like when we're operating as an elementary principal team, or just like when we're operating as a teaching and learning team. I know that at least one of our principals went back and did the exact same activity with his whole staff, and the same ahas, I think, started to happen for the staff around what does this mean now as we're collaborating vertically through the grades as opposed to just horizontally across the content area. I think there's excitement for doing something different, because I think, you know, educators always want to do more for kids. Educators always want more kids to be successful. So I think there's optimism in that respect. Have we gotten into the difficult work of peeling back the layers? We have not yet. And you know, with that then comes some of the challenge of how do we support our staff members as we go through some of those difficult conversations.
And I'll add to Tony that continues to be the work that we'll come alongside and partner in the development of that culture piece, right? They walk side by side. And when it gets difficult for adults, what does that look like for us as leaders? And that's my role, to be a coach to Tony and the team, and continuing to take steps there.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a comment. I think with change, a lot of people don't like change and don't like new things coming in and kind of routing them in a different direction. But I think if we can keep the goals concise and clear, it's gonna alleviate some of the worries and the fear of moving forward.
Tony, we may need to do that barbell activity with the board. Just an idea, because I think that's what Amy's speaking to, right? When we have clarity, change gets much easier. So I'm gonna take a note of that. We'll see if we could ever work that in sometime this year with them.
I like it. Other comments or questions, feedback?
Okay, I'm going to jump in here if that's okay. My question is, as the newest board member, I'm assuming that we do not have anything like this process already in place. And then if we see areas we're lacking in, how is there going to be like testing of the students? Like, you know, back in my day, we did the California Achievement Test. You know, how are we going to look at all of this? And then is it going to be, when we find an area that's seems to be lacking? Is it overall the whole student, the whole department? Is it, just individual students? How are we going to address that and make the changes necessary to make sure that every kid is getting what they need? Does it need to be an overall change? Does the program good? Is it just because of certain kids, and whatever issues they're having, whether it be, some outside influence that is making them not achieve in a certain area, or is it our program? How are we going to affect that? My question is, how are we going to test it? How are we going to affect change in it?
I appreciate the question, Rob. And I heard 2 or 3 layers of questions in there. So if I miss something or we miss something, feel free to
That's okay. Yeah.
talk. But one of the questions I heard in there is, to what degree are we already doing this kind of work, or are we not? And I guess I would say that we have always been a data-driven organization, monitoring our progress, but we've not done it as incrementally and with the kind of sophistication, frankly, that I think that this is going to force us to bring to the table.
Okay.
You asked about a specific kind of assessment. You talked about a California achievement test that you remember taking as a student. Today, we have, I think, a real gift from this is, as a district, we've got lots of great assessments that are data, that are research supported. But I will tell you, I think that this is really going to force us to ask and answer the question, are we using the right assessments? Are they measuring the right things? And are they measuring the right things in the right timelines? And if they're not, let's find a different assessment that provides us with the information we need. I think in reading, I can tell you that at the K-5 level, we've been together, Tamara and I've been paying some really close attention in the last 8-10 months as we get ready for some improvements in that space. Do we have the right assessments in place? And I think largely we do, but we also have some gaps. And that's going to be a piece where we're going to need teacher leaders to help inform what are the pieces of data that they need to improve grouping or instruction for students. And when I say improve, again, it's a cultural change thing. So often I'm guilty as a charge too, right? If I hear I'm supposed to improve, it means I'm not perfect, right? No, everybody wants to be perfect. I think educators especially want to be perfect. They grew up, well, I'll speak about myself. There's the assumption that teachers have all the answers culturally, and they don't. And it's okay to have the system and individuals learning all the time. And anyway, I'm rambled long enough here. You asked those 2 questions. Tamara, is there anything else you would add to my rambling there about Rob's questions?
No, I think you answered it, but I guess, Rob, did that answer your?
Partially, yeah. That has been my biggest concern, and one of my 2 top reasons that I decided to get involved with the school board is because while the whole lockdowns and everything were going on with COVID, I sat around because I was unessential, with my job that I do. So I had a year and a half to sit and do research and watch videos. And the biggest thing that I noticed in everything that I was doing is how uneducated people are coming out of high school now. And I mean, diplomas are a little bit more than a participation trophy is what it seemed like. Now, I'm not saying that specifically about our district. I'm glad we are looking at this stuff and going to be addressing it. I just, my basic question is how are we gonna get that data is kind of what I'm curious. Are we going to do testing? Is it going to be based on, individual grades of the students, or, how is that going to be measured? That's the one thing that I guess I'm not understanding.
So I'll come at it 2 ways. I hear a question there. One is, in Oregon, it was until 3 years ago required that a student pass the state reading assessment and pass the state math assessment, or produce a portfolio of products that show that they have mastered the skills that are the same rigor as a state test. The state test is no longer required. We still have the same expectation we had before, right? That kids
Okay.
master those same content standards. So our expectations have not lowered. There is not currently a test, though, that's a summative single point measure that is required to graduate from the Mohawk River School District. That could change, right? There are some districts that have really looked at other assessments, whether that's the ACT battery or SAT battery, and that could be a whole nother conversation around the efficacy or lack thereof on standardized testing. But we'll answer the question, because the board should know what we're measuring, right? We should know what we're measuring. And
Yeah.
when we come back in January, I hope to be able to answer that question a little more specifically.
Okay. Thank you.
Tony, your comment reminded me of a phrase that I hear quite a bit, and that is perfect is the enemy of good. I assume you've heard that one quite a bit, about how you can get hung up on perfection and that as a result, you're not getting anything done. So yeah, I applaud the effort.
It's really, I think just when I think I've learned a few things, I realize I got some more things to learn, and I've had a good time here so far in our work with Studer, and the future's bright. Madison, what do you think? I saw you give me the thumbs up for the lunchroom example earlier. One example I know that our high school has done is, after closing the campus, the board is all aware, we'll close the high school campus during lunch. And our high school student leadership and adults have gone out of their way to make that cafeteria a really compelling, vibrant place where kids want to be. And I'm working with our food services, folks too, to expand food offerings. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but cafeteria is an important place for kids to find success. Any other questions or comments? Casey, thanks a bunch for joining us from Minnesota tonight.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin
I
tonight.
have my feet in my house, which is lovely. So yeah, and I will say this. This is the hardest, quite honestly, the hardest part of the process. And it feels messy and it feels slow. But establishing those most important, like, how will we know we're successful? Those most important metrics, and doing that part well allows the energy to shift into how do we move them, with a lot of internal belief that those are the right metrics to be watching. And so I really applaud Tony and Tamara for their ongoing deep thinking. I always know when I get on a call with them, it's going to be purposeful and deep, and I'm excited to be an honor to be your partner as we continue this process.
Well, we couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you.
Yep, very much.
I think we've covered the bases that we had hoped to cover this evening. We'll be back for sure in January with an update.
Sounds fair.
So that will be the draft or the final metrics?
I think that'll be our final best thinking administratively at that time, but it's always a work in progress. So if at that point in time there are other things the board would want us to consider, I think it'll be up for an ongoing discussion.
Okay.
At some point, though, landing in a place where we're all agreed, these are that clarity that Casey was talking about is going to be really valuable, because then we can, every member of the organization can know they're focusing their energy in the right ways.
And we're looking at implementing this next year or this year?
I think we're it's a staged engagement. So
Okay.
we're already engaging. I think by the time we get to the fall of next year, you can say you could reasonably expect that all layers horizontally and vertically in the organization will be fully engaged, if that makes sense.
Okay.
No other comments or questions? No. Well, that was short and sweet. Do you have anything else to go over, Tony? Are we good?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Casey. I'll be talking to you soon. Looking forward to
Mm.
hearing from the executive team.